ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? Alright, so basically today what I wanted to do was go through and continue my tutorial with creating a graphical application for Python using the GTK bindings and Glade interface designer. So I'm going to go ahead and do kind of a very quick recap and pull up my text editor here and kind of do a quick recap here. So last time what we did was we went through and we imported some libraries, we set up a class, and in that class we went through and we created a builder, connected signals to that builder, and then from there had a button that also had a signal that allowed us to print hello world. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. You know, you've got your main Glade file, you've got the builder object, and then from the builder we connected the signal, and then from there, or rather, excuse me, we added the file to the builder, which then in the background did the necessary actions. We then connected the signal here, and we then could reference objects from that builder and do stuff. So in this instance, we connected a signal again to the window that allowed us to do the delete event. Okay, and then of course we did the necessary show function so that we could show the window and its child components. Okay, that's the quick rundown. That's really the core concept of kind of graphical programming. Is you've got something that will allow you to build a window, and then you connect signals to that window, and then you have your logic, advanced logic, parsed in the background in subfiles and stuff like that. Okay, so really the core concept of the window process is literally just make a file connect signals, and you're done. That's basically 2 steps. Now, obviously, those 2 steps are subcategorized with other advanced steps, such as actually creating the GUI and, making the actual proper signals and blah, 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 but you get the point. That the core concept there is signals and making an interface. Boom. All right. So today, what I'm going to do is talk about laying out the window. Okay. And in this instance, I'm going to go ahead and bring up, of course, my Glade file here and minimize that again. And so I have now an empty window. I removed the button. Okay. In fact, really, I should probably go ahead and actually add the button to make my point about what I'm going to talk about here. So you'll see here that right now we've got a button in the window, and that's what we did previously. Okay. Now, if I wanted to add another button, though, we kind of have a problem. We cannot do so. And the reason being that this button is consuming all the available workspace of this window. Okay. And so what do we do? How can we contain this button to its own little section of the window that we want, and then from there add other items or objects, right? How do we do that? Well, I think you all kind of maybe heard my emphasis on contains. And so that's what we're going to talk about, is we're really going to today talk about containers and how we can kind of partition our workspace and then subpartition other parts of partitions such that we can get then the layout of our graphical interface. And then I'm also going to talk about the text input field or the GtkEntry field. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this button, and as you'll see, we only have the root window. So now we want to talk about containers, and there are a lot of different kind of containers, and the ones that I find really myself using a lot are Gtk Box and GTK fixed, with maybe some sub-partitioning going on using maybe GTK list box or popover. Okay, there are a bunch of other containers, and I'm not really going to get into all of them. I'm just going to kind of cover the core ones that I tend to use that seem to make it the most efficient and most simple way to kind of create a graphical interface. And so to do that, I'm going to talk about the list box first and foremost, because that's the one that I tend to use the most, it seems. And so the Gtk box is just that. It's a box that contains kind of sub boxes, right? So it represents basically partitions that allow you to then store other items or children in those partitions. Okay, so as you'll see, we have 3 in the 3 kind of little sub boxes, right? So we can store stuff there. So if I wanted to, I could go over to control and add a button over and over again here, and from there we are now consuming the entirety of that GTK box with these buttons. Okay, now we can actually though add more partitions to the GTK box, and so that's kind of what we're going to talk about right now. And remember that on the right side here we have all our kind of settings and kind of finer controls to the object that we're working with. And in this instance, the object we're working with is the box. So the general tab, of course, allows us to assign an ID to it, but it also has, of course, sub stuff, and then, common signals, etc. So you'll see in the general tab that we have below the ID area, we have things like spacing, and then orientation and number of items. And so instead of 3 that it defaults to, we can either make it less than or more than. In this instance, we can't right now make it less than because we have 3 things consuming it. But we can certainly make more partitions for this. So we can add however many we want if we wanted to do it this way. Okay, and in this instance, I'm just going to add one more. Okay, now in this GTK box, I can actually partition it with another container. Okay, in fact, I could partition it with its own self, right? And so I could orientate this instead of vertically, horizontally. Okay, and so then I could add more buttons to this GTK box. And so as you'll see, the GTK box is kind of pretty versatile and allowing you to kind of contain a lot of other components that you can then kind of make it more simple and all that, right? So I tend to really kind of use this method where I use the GTK box. I may split it between 2 windows that I want equidistantly sized, or maybe one to consume all and all that, etc. Okay. Now it's kind of hard to add the button to this box. Okay. So maybe we want to do something that will affect this box such that it will expand to consume all the space. So you'll see that we have in the settings section something called packing. And packing is where you really kind of start to kind of do a little more fine-grained control with how things expand and flow. So by that, what I mean is you'll see that it's presently expanding across the board to consume, equally horizontally. Okay? So, and you'll see in the packing section something that says fill, right? And so we can actually make it consume all the vertical space by setting expand. And that makes it easier for us to go through and then, fill the thing accordingly, right? So if I wanted to, I could go through then and of course add, controls, and I'm going to do just that. I'm going to click on a button and add another button. And I really got to figure out if there's a control scheme to allow me to just like duplicate the former action that I did. I don't know if there is one, but yeah. Anyway, we can just do it this way, okay? And cool, boom, booyah. Now those buttons are consuming, all the space. Okay, and this box is consuming all the space. And so, okay, we can actually preview what we've done by right-clicking on the tree view and selecting Preview Snapshot. Okay, and when I shrink this, you'll see that we have now our window with our respective buttons that I can click on. And they will do their, nice little pulsate action and all that. Well, maybe we don't like the way that this feels because, it's kind of not consuming the space properly. Like we want maybe our buttons to consume this space properly and completely. So again, this comes down to effectively a question of what's expanding or filling. Okay. And in this instance, the box is not the one that we're going to actually affect, but rather the child components. Or we could do it within the box too, to be actually frank. So if we wanted a single child component to consume all the space, we could go through and click on expand, and it will expand to consume, the spacing. But maybe we want all the children to expand equidistantly with one another. To do that, you can go to GTK Box and go back to General, and you'll see an option that says Homogeneous, and that will homogenize the spacing between the 3 or 4 or 5 or however many components you have to make it equidistant or equispatially parsed or homogenized, right? And we can also actually do the same thing with the other box to make it homogeneous in terms of button consumption as well, okay? And voila, now we have maybe a little bit of a prettier design. And by the way, you don't have to right click on this field. You can go to the bottom right here and click on the little preview snapshot button here that's right here. And so I can shrink this, and you'll see now that the box is of course consuming space, homogenized. And so if I were to expand this, the buttons themselves are now expanding to consume the entirety of the window in a more aesthetically pleasing layout, I would most certainly argue. Okay? So, okay, that is the the GTK box. But there are, of course, other boxes that we can add or other containers, right? And many of you may actually see when you're, looking through the list, you'll see something that says GTK fixed. And a lot of people will use GTK fixed, or at least I should clarify, a lot of people who are beginning will probably default to wanting to use GTK fixed. And I will say, I will try to implore you to not do that, but let's be frank, I actually did the very same thing when I was starting out. I used GTK fixed too, because it was just kind of easier to kind of figure out. It was just easier to figure out. But basically, you can use GTK fixed, but I really say don't do that. And so you could go through and do button, and you can then, move that button around accordingly. And to do that, you can just go to the bottom right, left here, and click on this little move button icon, and now you can drag the button around to position it accordingly. Or you can go to packing, and you can set its XYZ positioning that way. So I could set, 15 here, and then Y position 15, and that will position the button accordingly. Don't do this, but I know you're going to do it, because if you're like me, you did the same thing for a while, and then you'll finally realize, I don't want to lock the window height and width to a certain width and height. So you can do this, but don't do this. And there are honestly good reasons to use GTK fixed. Maybe because you're going to do, I'm trying to figure out something that would be like an example of why you do it, but maybe you want to position images in a collage, in a different position collage. That would be a reason why you'd use the GTK fixed thing. But you shouldn't use GTK fixed for really kind of layout, right? That should go to things like the box and grid. Now grid is pretty similar to box, but grid will allow you to, for instance, when I click on a button and add it, when you use then packing, you can then specify width to say 2. And so when we do it, then let's say I add another button. Say, I add another button such as like here, yeah, boom. So you'll see that then when I create this, and let's say that these buttons want to, will they expand? No, they will not let me expand. Okay, I just wanted to see if we could do it that way, but it won't. Okay. Is there an homogeneous? There isn't homogeneous. Okay, and homogeneous vertical. Okay, so I'm just gonna make this expand here. You'll see that when we preview this, that when we kind of position it this way using the grid, and did it not run? Did I not hit the right thing? Nope, it didn't. Okay, right click. Let's do a preview snapshot. There we go. So we'll see that, of course, these are consuming all the buttons, but this one consumes a little bit more space than this button, even though we have said to consume in a homogeneous manner. And so that's how that's the nature of the grid, where it allows you to kind of do a little bit more easier partitioning, where you kind of say, okay, I want this partition to really kind of consume this amount of space, and then this one will sit accordingly to that amount of space. And so you'll see it's kind of like thirds, maybe 2/3 here and 1/3 here, right? You can do it that way. And so again, these are how you use the containers to position your windows, and it's gonna honestly take some time probably to get used to it. And like I said, I tend to just use GTK Box and then maybe Grid if I'm really doing something even more advanced in terms of like what I really want for layout. But really, GTK Box for me has done a lot of good work and is a big workhorse, at least in my workflow. Maybe that is not the most correct way to do it. I want to clarify. I'm not necessarily, going to explain the most correct way to do it, but it will certainly at least get you up and running quickly. Okay, cool. We now kind of understand how to go through and lay out our windows. Let's go ahead and kind of do a quick example about the GtkEntry. And I'm going to add another one, GtK Box, because I said, I was going to show you all how to kind of get the input box last time. So I'm also going to go through and modify this GtK Box to only have 2 input fields, okay? So I'm just going to do it that way. And I'm also going to say, homogenized maybe? Yeah, we'll just do homogenized. Okay. And this button, by the way, I'm going to change the label of it. And so we're going to go over here to the label, and I'm just going to say print text. Okay. And I'm now going to go through, and by the way, I'm going to re-add the signal to this button. I guess I shouldn't have deleted it the first time, but whatever. I wasn't initially thinking about how I was going to do this, but I figured it out. Anyway, so I'm going to go through and can attach it back to the clicked here. Remember that we have our signals. We're attaching the signal to here, and we're referencing it in our code here, okay? And what I'm then going to do is now go work on and talk about the entry box here quickly. So go ahead and go to the general tab. And again, I think you're all now kind of familiar with the concept of what the general is doing. And now we can understand, of course, what the packing is doing, because we can now, do things like, oh, positionally, this, entry box is in slot 0. We want to switch it. We can now set it to slot 1. Sweet, right? Y'all get the point. Or we can even have it expand or not, fill or not. In fact, look at that. Yeah, you could have it fill and not fill, right? So anyway, I'm going to have it actually in this instance fill. But anyway, play with the settings and get used to it. That's what I'm trying to say, and then explain. But anyway, okay. So we're going to give our entry, I'm going to just say text box or maybe to print ENTRI, to print entry. That's what I'm going to call it, okay? And then we're going to talk about some of the settings here. So you'll kind of see that we have actually a lot of settings, and most of them are really pretty straightforward and explanatory. Like things like the emoji icon, you can now select emojis or pop in emojis into your text field, etc. You kind of get the point. Many of these things are pretty self-explanatory. Things like maximum width in characters, that's kind of like gonna limit the width of the characters or the width of the text box, right? You get the point. But the ones that you kind of want to generally will use with the input field is the purpose. So in this instance, you have a lot of options like alpha, digit, number, frame, password even, etc. So this is the box that you'll tend to focus on a lot. And so as a quick example, if you go choose password, then further down below, you'll see an option that says visibility checkmarked. And then when you hover over it, it says, false displays the invisible character instead of the actual text password. So, i.e. password mode. So if you were to uncheck mark this and then check mark invisible character, it'll then display an invisible character type for you. Okay? So I'm going to uncheck mark that, recheck mark this, and then convert this back to actually was it alpha? Oh my goodness. I think it was, freeform. Sorry, there we go. I was like, where did it go? Freeform. And freeform just basically says this can pretty much input anything into this field, right? The other one that you're going to focus on maybe is... yes. The other one that you'll probably want to focus on most as well is placeholder text. So, enter text to print is what I'm going to say here. Okay? So enter text to print. The placeholder text gives you instructions about what you should do for that text field, obviously. And so, voila. Okay, cool. So enter text to print. We have an ID, and we can now work with this input field. I'm going to go ahead and copy that ID and Control S to save, and then go back to our code. Now we have the button that has the signal, and we want to go through and get the text from that input box and work with it. So what do we do? Well, let's remember what we did last time, say, for the window. We had the self.builder, we got the object, and we referenced the ID that we gave to that object. Okay? So we can quite literally, I'm going to paste this here, we can quite literally copy this line, and that's what I tend to do, is just if I need to reuse something, I copy the line and then modify it accordingly. And so I'm going to copy that line, take the ID, put it in place for this. I'm going to name this the... Control V, entry, entry, come on, entry, input, okay? I don't know, you can name it whatever you want to name it, but okay, we got now the entry input, okay? And I'm gonna then also give, we now have the object, but we need to get its input. So how do we do that? Well, quite literally, most input, getting text from most input in any language tends to be get text. Java does it. This Python does it. That's actually honestly the only experience I have is with Java, Python, and all that. Maybe HTML or JavaScript in certain instances anyway. Anyway, you get my point. So get text is pretty much always universally the command that you use to get text from an input field. So to get it, what we'll do is I'm going to assign it to a variable. I'm just going to say text, and then I'm going to go through and call it entry put, and then we're just going to do get underscore text. Oh, I thought it was going to autocomplete for me here. So we'll get underscore text, and that's going to get us our text. Now, depending on the input field, you may want to use a Python string operation to go through and strip out white space. So you could do strip, and that'll clear out any white space trailing it or preceding it of the text, right? And so I'm going to do in this instance to do just that. And then obviously we will place hello world with text. Okay, I'll go ahead and Control S to save that, and we can go through and run this. And I'm going to go ahead and open up a terminal and zoom in. I'm going to do Python 3, and of course tab it, main.py. Yeah, main.py. Okay, boom. And so now I already copied the text from what we had before. I have hello world, and I can print the text, and you'll see in the top there, the left corner, hello world is being printed to the terminal. And we could even enter a whole lot of space between hello world and the bar, maybe center line it there, and boom, it's gonna assign it. And our graphical application is going to expand according to the parameters that we gave it for the fill, the expand, or the homogenized settings, right? So it kind of looks maybe aesthetically pleasing, I guess. At least in this particular instance, it looks aesthetically pleasing. And then, of course, you can type whatever you want to type, really, like YOLO, things like that, YOLO, etc. And so that'll go through and print the text for you. We can also go through and set the text if we wanted to. And quite literally, the command to set the text would be, let's see, text. We'll print the text in this instance, and then we'll do entry input dot set underscore text, and then we give it some string that we want, right? So maybe we always want it to default to hello world, right? So when we print the text or change the text, it will default to hello world. We'll run it, so YOLO, and then YOLO is going to go through and change to hello world, and we've now set the text to be just that, okay? All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. That covers, the text input box. That covers layout and design. Next time, I'm probably going to be going through and covering things like a little bit more about signal events, as well as I'm going to go through and cover likely the list box and tree view box. Depending. It just depends on my mood and what I want to do. But thank you very much for watching. Please rate, subscribe, tell me what you think, and I will talk to you all later.